The most dangerous weapon in the history of reggae wasn't a gun, and it wasn't a political speech. It was a single matchstick held in the trembling hand of a genius who had lost his mind. In 1979, the man who taught Bob Marley how to be a rebel stood in the center of his legendary studio, surrounded by the master tapes that defined a generation. He didn't press record, and he didn't mix a track. He lit the match and watched the history of music turn into ash. Why would the wizard of reggae burn his own temple to the ground? And did the dark magic he used to create Bob Marley eventually come back to destroy them both? If you want to know the dangerous truth behind the legend, you are in the right place. Welcome back to Marley Files, the Untold Stories. Smash that like button if you believe the truth deserves to be heard. And let's walk into the fire. To understand the fire, we have to understand the spark. Rewind to 1969. Kingston, Jamaica is boiling over with heat and political violence. Bob Marley is not a global icon yet. In fact, he is failing. He's a country boy from 9 Mile, broke, frustrated, and wearing a suit to sing American-style soul music that no one wants to hear. He has the voice, and he has the hunger, but he lacks the edge. He is a lion that hasn't learned how to roar. Desperate for a sound that could match the anger in the streets, Bob walks into a tiny, chaotic record shop on Charles Street. This is the lair of Lee "Scratch" Perry. Bob Marley walked into that shop looking for a producer, but he ended up making a deal with a man who claimed to speak with spirits. Lee Perry was terrifying and was known as the Upsetter. People in the ghetto whispered that he didn't just record music. He captured souls on magnetic tape. He was a small man with giant energy, a mad scientist who blew smoke onto his equipment to bless it. When Bob and Perry locked eyes, the air in the room changed. It was the meeting of two storms. Perry didn't look at Bob and see a pop star. He saw a weapon. He saw a young man carrying years of rejection, poverty, and pain, the perfect vessel for Perry's musical revolution. Perry told him, "You sound like a baby. I am going to make you sound like a man who has seen hell." This wasn't a collaboration. It was an exorcism, and Perry was about to pull the demons right out of Bob's throat. They began working in a studio that was barely the size of a closet. It wasn't glamorous. It was a sweatbox. Perry was a tyrant behind the mixing board. He stripped the Wailers of their suits and their polite harmonies. He forced the Barrett brothers to play the bass so heavy it rattled the fillings in your teeth. But his main target was Bob. Perry pushed him to the brink of physical and emotional exhaustion, screaming at him to bleed the lyrics rather than just sing them. Under Perry's mad direction, Bob's voice dropped an octave, becoming rough, urgent, and commanding. They recorded songs like Duppy Conqueror and Soul Rebel. These weren't just catchy tunes. They were threats directed at the establishment. For a brief moment, they were one mind in two bodies, but they forgot that when you play with fire, someone eventually gets burned. They were inseparable, eating together and reasoning about Rastafari until the sun came up. Perry became the father figure Bob never had, and Bob became the voice Perry always wanted. It seemed like a brotherhood that nothing could break, but in the music industry, where there is genius, there is always a vulture circling overhead. The crack in the foundation appeared in 1972 with the arrival of Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records. He came to Jamaica looking for the next big thing and found the Wailers. But Blackwell saw a problem. Lee Perry was too wild, too unpredictable, and too unmarketable. Blackwell wanted the rebel image, but he wanted it controlled. He offered Bob Marley a deal that was impossible to refuse: money, international fame, and high-end production. But there was a catch. The deal was for Bob Marley, not for Lee Perry. Imagine the person you trust most in the world stabbing you in the back, not with a knife, but with a fountain pen. Bob made the choice that changed history. Driven by ambition, he took the master tapes, the very tapes that held Perry's sweat and magic, and handed them to Blackwell. He left the wizard behind. To Lee Perry, this was not just a business transaction, it was the theft of his soul. He watched as his spiritual son flew to London to become a superstar using the sound Perry helped create, while Perry got nothing. No credit, no royalties, no fame. The soul rebel became the king of reggae, and the king had no more use for the man who gave him his crown. Perry didn't sue. He didn't call a lawyer. He retreated into the shadows and began to plan a revenge that was purely spiritual. While Bob Marley was selling out stadiums in Europe, Lee Perry was descending into a personal hell at his home studio, the legendary Black Ark. It became a haunted house. Perry became convinced that the music industry was a vampire sucking the blood of the artist. He believed Bob had sold his soul to Babylon. The madness took over. Perry stopped washing, ate only bananas, and covered every inch of the studio walls with strange, cryptic graffiti. X's over faces, biblical verses, and curses. He even planted vinyl records in his garden, trying to grow pure music from the earth. Visitors who entered the Black Ark ran away in terror, claiming the studio was filled with ghosts that Perry was trying to control. He walked around with a hammer, smashing his own equipment, screaming at invisible enemies. He claimed the vibrations were attracting evil spirits, duppies that wanted to kill him. He would tell anyone who listened, "I gave Bob the heart, but he took the head and left the body to rot." And then came the morning of the fire in 1979. The tension inside Lee Perry's mind snapped. He realized that the only way to get rid of the vampires was a total purification. He didn't use a bulldozer. He grabbed a lighter. He stood in the middle of his life's work, smelled the gasoline, and decided that the only way to be free was to burn it all down. Perry doused the mixing console, the very altar where he and Bob had created magic, with gasoline. He splashed it on the walls and the tapes, and then he lit the flame. As the fire roared to life, consuming the history of reggae, Perry didn't run. He stood there, dancing and chanting, watching the smoke rise like an offering. When the firefighters arrived, the Black Ark was a skeleton of ash, but Lee Perry was smiling. He had exorcised his demons, even if the cost was the destruction of the greatest musical laboratory the world had ever known. The fire at the Black Ark was a cosmic scream that echoed all the way to where Bob Marley stood at the pinnacle of his fame. But the shadows were lengthening for Bob, too. Just 2 years after Perry burned the studio, the legend would fall. When Bob Marley died of cancer in 1981, the world wept. But Lee Perry didn't weep. He nodded, as if he had seen it coming in the smoke of his burning studio. He claimed that Bob's death was the price of the deal he had made. Did the student outgrow the master? Or did the master know that the path to fame was actually a path to the grave? In the years that followed, Perry's anger softened into a mystical understanding. He spoke of Bob as a brother who had to walk a different path. They were two halves of the same circle. Bob Marley became the face of peace, but Lee "Scratch" Perry remained the root, the dirty, tangled force underground that gave the tree its life. They needed each other to change the world, even if that connection was destined to burn them both. History is written by the winners, but the music is written by the madmen who aren't afraid to play with fire. Today, When you listen to Three Little Birds, listen closely to the bass line. You can still hear the fire of the Black Ark, the ghost of a friendship that changed history, and the echo of the man who burned it all down just to save his soul. If this story of fire and betrayal opened your eyes to the truth behind the legend, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Marley Files, the untold stories, for more secrets from the shadows of history. And tell me in the comments, do you think Bob Marley would have become a legend without Lee Perry? Or did he steal the magic from the wizard? I read every single thought. One love.